Welcome to Legal 123s with ByrdAdatto. Legal issues simplified through real client stories and real-world experiences. Creating simplicity in 3, 2, 1.
And welcome back to another episode of Legal 123s with ByrdAdatto. I'm your host, ByrdAdatto, with my co-host, Michael, the marketing machine, Byrd.
Nice one. I like it. Well, as a business and healthcare law firm, we meet a lot of interesting people and learn their amazing stories. In today's episode, we're going to talk with one of our longtime friends, Tim Sawyer. Brad and I have known Tim for many years, and he probably doesn't realize what an impact he's had on some of the strategies we've implemented. I know Tim's aware of some of them, but he just almost always has some nugget that we end up adopting in some way with our business.
All right, before we get into our guest, Michael, as you know, I love movies. And do you remember the movie A Few Good Men?
Well, of course. Tom Cruise, Jack Nicholson, Demi Moore, all in it. And of course, 6 Degrees of Kevin Bacon. A movie about a naval investigation and a trial of 2 Marines who may have killed one of their own in a hazing accident. And I think should be a required movie for all incoming lawyers.
Absolutely. It's a great movie. I personally always love the scene when Demi Moore is objecting in the courtroom, and she strenuously objects, and then later on her co-counsel kind of mocks the entire process. So I always thought that was really funny. But most people remember the scene in the courtroom when Jack Nicholson's on the stand as Colonel Jessup, and he's being cross-examined by Lieutenant Caffey Tom Cruise.
Yeah, and Colonel Jessup starts with, "Do you want the truth?" as the question.
Yeah, and that's, Michael, I'm not going to be able to do my Jack Nicholson impression, but with a very passionate response, he says, "You can't handle the truth."
It's a classic. And but anyway, what does this have to do with Tim?
Well, as you mentioned in the beginning, we've got to spend a lot of time with Tim over the years, and he has this incredible great nature. He's also a motivational speaker. And when he thinks about the passion and energy that Tim brings to the podium, it kind of reminds me of Jack Nicholson in that particular courtroom scene, because let's be honest, Tim's energy will dominate the room.
Well, I'm glad you went with Jack Nicholson and not Hulk Hogan. But so I'm going to do the formal introduction and give the bio for Tim, and this will not even scratch the surface as usual with our guests, and especially with Tim. Tim is the host of a podcast, True to Form. We've been on it a few times. It's awesome. You should check it out. Tim is the founder and president of Crystal Clear. They provide software marketing and consulting. And Crystal Clear is not Tim's first rodeo, as we'll talk about today. He's a 2-time Inc. 500 entrepreneur and highly regarded speaker for more than 28 medical associations. Tim, welcome.
I assume I'm going to be answering some questions, and the only question I have for you guys is, are you sure you want the truth?
Well, we can always edit it out if we don't want
it. Thank you for having me on, guys. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. We're super pumped to have you. And Tim, our theme this season is thinking outside the box. And as Michael had referenced, you have a really cool story. You've had multiple different ventures, so in different industries. Currently, we are at Crystal Clear. So let's talk, let's first start with the beginning, which is where, what were your influences to develop Crystal Clear?
Yeah, it's a great question. And so my story, I haven't had, believe it or not, haven't had a lot of stops along the way. So you graduate, college at 22 years old. The only job, quote, I've ever had, I worked for a federal savings bank for 12 years. It was really a subprime lender cloaked as a federal savings bank. The guy who owned that bank, and it was probably at the peak worth $200 million. Unfortunately, I didn't have any equity in it, but was such an animal. This guy literally at 70 years old was still going in, the president and the owner of the bank, at 7 a.m. He would work till 8 o'clock at night. And at the peak, he would literally call me when I was working West Coast hours, because we did business in LA, literally call me driving on the highway by the bank, call me at 10 o'clock in the office and remind me that there was a light on upstairs and to go and turn it off. And what the big takeaway from that, it was a crazy sales environment. Talk about a crazy sales environment. We literally had, if you remember the old 7-Eleven mirrors, You go in and they could look down the aisles to make sure nobody was shoplifting. Where we had 40 loan officers, at the end of each loan officer row, they had a 7-Eleven mirror so that the managers could make sure that people were on the phone throughout the entire day. This was a hardcore sales environment. And I was grateful. It was difficult. It was competitive, but I was grateful because it embedded in me for the rest of my life that every morning you get up, you have to be thinking, okay, what can I do right now to get another deal done? And then extrapolate that to get a task done or grow a company. So the work ethic that instilled in me, and a healthy sense of fear, because this guy would literally walk desk to desk, 40 loan officers, and go through your pipeline one deal at a time and ask you to show him the paperwork. And he was probably making $10 million a year at a time at that point in time. I never forget that. So that was the only job I had. And then I ended up meeting Adam DeGrave. I assume we'll talk about that. We started our first venture in 2005 in the mortgage industry, in the teeth of the worst economic crisis in the mortgage industry in our lifetimes. And it was an interesting stop. We had to retool. So we had all these amazing contracts. We couldn't execute any of them because banks were failing, credit unions were failing, mortgage companies were failing. And so we had to retool the entire business to cater to the insurance industry. And so the lesson from that time in my life was you have to be adaptable and flexible, and you have to know when to fold them. So that was the second stop. We sold that to a private equity firm. We did it for 8 years and then moved from insurance into elective medicine. And Adam brought a ton of experience because he brought, prior to going into mortgage and insurance, he was actually a car guy, built a really big business in the car industry. So each one of those taught me a different lesson, and I'm grateful for all of them. And some of them, I always call it tuition. I paid a lot of tuition along the way.
So yeah, the consistent or constant there is that it's you and Adam. I mean, you guys hooked up, I guess with what was at the time the mortgage industry that pivoted. But talk about kind of how you and Adam went into business together and what your goals were, both with that business and as you started Crystal Clear.
So the way Adam and I met is our daughters went to school together. Then the wives became friends, and then he and I became friends. And so he was getting ready to sell. He owned a company at that time called BZ Results that was doing, first generation digital marketing, CRM, that type of thing, website development. And he sold it to ADP, the payroll company. And about a year and a half prior to that sale, he and I had been friends for a few years. He said, "Hey man, would love to work together on my next project." And he introduced me to the idea that there's a different way of getting paid where you don't always have to exchange dollars for hours, and that you can build IP and then sell that IP. So you don't always have to have you're moving your hands to make money. And it was a really cool concept. So he actually invited me to become a partner. And he had that. BZ was a super successful business. He sold, like I said, they sold that to ADP, the payroll company. And we were friends. So we've been friends for 20 years, business partners for 15. He had a set of skills that I didn't, and I had a set of skills that were complementary to his. And we kind of recognize that about each other, that the things that he's amazing at, I'm not. The things that I'm amazing at, he's not. And together, it works. It works for us.
Did you guys go into your first venture together with a goal of building it and selling it, or did y'all have a different goal?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the lessons that we've learned in the two companies that we built together is in both of them, we began with the end in mind. So the way that we look at business is maybe a little bit different than other people. In other words, we're not building legacy businesses. So first we look at what's the niche and what can we bring to that niche to be disruptive. But before we did anything, we had very detailed financial and sales models. And it was always, okay, This is how we're going to start the business. But the bigger question is, how are we going to get out? How are we going to exit? Who are the potential buyers? And then once you do that, if you act like your business is for sale from day one, then you have what you can do then is manage to that sale. So if you say, okay, 7 years from now, 8 years from now, 10 years from now, this is what we think we could get. This is what current, you can kind of look at it and say, okay, this is what a current valuation would look like if we had this profit margin, gross profit margin, if we had this much revenue, this many clients. And believe it or not, that approach is actually more important than the industry you choose itself. It's a strong financial model, strong sales model, and at what point do we want to get out? And then you manage it. You create a boss, and that boss is that fictitious buyer that you're going to bump into 7 to 10 years later, and it keeps you on track. It's so we always start with, how do we get out?
I notice every time we talk, and I ask this question on purpose because I think it's such a strong discipline on how to run a business. Your vision is, the exit, but everyone should have a vision and be using that as an anchor point. But every time you talk about adjustments that you're making to your business, whether it's the way you're offering products to your customers or anything, you always follow that up with why you're doing it and why that impacts your end goal. And you always seem so focused with where you're trying to get, even if you make adjustments to get there.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah, well, it's like I said, it's a great. It forces you to stay disciplined, because the hardest thing of being self-employed, whether you're a single practitioner med spa or a law firm, is there's no one standing over you saying, this is what you need to do today. And it's kind of like the straw man. So when you say, okay, this, you create in your brain, I work for this guy or this gal or this entity, and you manage to that. So it forces you to stay disciplined. And then everything else is just a variable. Yeah. So it helps you to overcome whatever, any business is going to have barriers and setbacks, and you've got to make adjustments. But if you stay focused on what are we trying to get to, and that might change, people's lifestyles change or whatever it is, but you've got to start with, okay, what do I want to get out of this business? And then at some level, and employees hate to hear this, but you got to remember that you created that business to serve you. And a lot of people struggle with that concept, meaning, I want to help my employees. I want to be a great boss. I want to be a great employer, all that stuff. But at the end of the day, this business is designed to serve me. And someone once said to me something I'll never forget. They said, in all your planning, Tim, profit should be your biggest expense. And very few people manage that way. So you start with, what do I want to get paid? What does Adam want to get paid? And then everything else is, and how do we support that and sell it? And if you stay disciplined on that, then it helps with those tough decisions, particularly, during COVID. You got to make tough decisions. But at the end of the day, that business is set up to serve you, so not the other way around.
And let's talk about that business that we're in right now. So I've had the pleasure of seeing you speak multiple times, and again, realize after hearing you speak, the importance of developing a digital marketing platform. But for our audience that might be hearing this term for the very first time, maybe you can give them the skinny as to what the heck is a digital marketing platform.
Yeah, so we call it, great question, and we call it an ecosystem. And what's amazing is that whether it's car dealerships, the mortgage industry, insurance, personal lines and commercial lines insurance, or elective medicine, everybody functions in the same ecosystem because it's retail. You've got to sell something. So it's very simple. And we call it a blended strategy. So it's not about one thing, and that ecosystem will morph as you have new social mediums. But essentially it comes down to this. What do you need to do to find patients or customers? You need to do all the things that drive traffic. So you got to build a site. You got to have SEO, a great search engine optimization strategy. You've got to utilize email marketing. You've got to optimize your social platforms. You absolutely should be now having some type of apparatus to do automated texting for promotional reasons. All those things need to happen all the time. And then inside that digital platform, you can't ignore that once that person gets to the front desk of that business or the phone, whatever it is, you've got to then convert them. So that scripting and frequently asked questions and dealing with that piece. And then you've got to have a CRM component, which is a customer relationship management component. That's the quarterback of all that. And everything that I just discussed, we've come up with a way to automate. And particularly in our social platforms, we have a trademark pending on a social distribution, so that we're doing social distribution for over 400 elective medical practices, and we have one person in our company that does it.
That's amazing. And I think something you said early on, which was key to how you built the business, which was, hey, I don't want to always be the one, making the widget. I want to figure out a system that builds the widgets for me. And what I love about the digital platform is that you can find ways to automate processes. And going back to what Michael said when we started this podcast, you introduced us to that world because we kind of had heard of it, but it wasn't even something that we were interested in understanding. And you were the one that was kicking us, guys, y'all need to understand this because it's so important. So we've always thought about, when we talk about this stuff, I mean, we can't think about it without thinking of you, which is good and bad, I guess,
I appreciate the compliment. And like I said, if you have something to sell, and every business has something to sell, even a nonprofit that's raising money, you still have to sell the vision. And there's only so many levers you can pull.
Yep.
And once you can identify what those levers are, I mean, we joke all the time about automating automation, how to do a better job automating automation, and that's the iterative nature of technology. But
yeah,
we couldn't. Yeah, I don't want to be sitting. I'm not coding websites. I don't change oil. I do what I do, and then try to automate the rest.
So we have a couple final questions that we'll use these last few minutes for. One is, love you to share what you're working on now, and then wrap up with just hearing some wisdom on some lessons you've learned with starting and selling a business. And then, of course, now you're pretty many years into running Crystal Clear.
Yeah, so I'll take the first question first. So what we're working on now at Crystal Clear is we've gone up the supply chain, guys. So in other words, we came into the business, great digital marketing platform, site, social, email, SEO, all that, and then built our own proprietary CRM, then migrated up the channel, the supply side with the supply channel with consulting to help people convert. Then we moved into practice management. So we've got a really great practice management platform right now. And practice management is your scheduling, your automated reminders by email, text, the ability to do billing, literally up to the point now where we can put the terminals in the practice, run the credit cards, and process all that through our software. So our biggest accomplishment recently was we took one of probably the largest plastic surgeon in the country, who was using Infusionsoft and Nextech, which is an EMR. So now we've migrated into EMR, and we took that tech stack and migrated 300,000 records to our platform. So that's what we've got going on right now. We're more of a software company than we are a marketing company, but we still do great marketing. And then in terms of the life's lessons, for me, it's the biggest thing, and I thought about it as we were getting ready to get on this call, is number one, like I said, begin with the end in mind. How do I get out of this? Take time up front, borrow money, put it on a credit card, whatever you do. Create a strong financial model that will keep you disciplined. Mm-hmm. You don't do that, you will never, ever, ever get what you want from your business, and you will wander in the woods forever. And then the last piece I would say is know when to fold them. If you've got a strategy that's not working, just because you've spent a year and 200,000 or 100,000 or $1 million trying to make that strategy work, know when to bail and say, you know what, I paid tuition on that, and then go to something that works. And so those are the three things. Begin with the end in mind, strong sales and financial model, know when to fold them if you've got a strategy that's not working. And if you just take those three things, and the last thing is try to walk in purpose. So yeah, you can build a business that makes money, but it's got to be something that inspires you and gives you oxygen, so that you can love, the business can love you, and you need to love it back.
That's awesome. I mean, yeah, again, this is that moment where when we sit around and have chances to visit with you, I get so I'm all pumped up right now to go start a business, which I don't need to do, but I love your again, the passion that you bring to it. And again, I know this is you're only hearing his voice, but Tim is a larger than life kind of guy, and he is a pleasure to be with in person. But I'm so happy that you could join us in this podcast today.
This is probably the shortest conversation we've ever had, which is really sad.
I'm trying to be disciplined.
Well,
thank you guys. I really appreciate you having me on. You guys are amazing, and you're humble in that you're doing. First of all, the fact that I'm on a podcast with really smart lawyers says everything you need to know about you guys. You're super innovative thinkers, and I'm grateful to have you as friends. And I look forward to doing a lot more projects together. So I appreciate it, guys.
Yeah, and as Michael started this podcast, Tim's True to Form podcast is great, and so we will have a link on the bottom of this podcast, so you can go find him. But please listen and subscribe to his podcast also. It's very informative. But thanks again, Tim.
Thank you very much, guys. Have a great day.
See you. Tim, we're so grateful for you being here. We got so much, as usual, from your content, and we're going to roll into a commercial right now. And after we come back, Brad and I will kind of give some legal perspective to the different pieces of wisdom that Tim shared.
Many business owners use legal counsel as a last resort rather than as a proactive tool that can further their success. Why? For most, it's the fear of unknown legal costs. ByrdAdatto's Access Plus program makes it possible for you to get the ongoing legal assistance you need for one predictable monthly fee. That gives you unlimited phone and email access to the legal team, so you can receive feedback on legal concerns as they arise. Access Plus, a smarter, simpler way to access legal services. Find out more. Visit ByrdAdatto.com today.
And welcome back to Legal 123s with ByrdAdatto. I am your host, ByrdAdatto, with my co-host, Michael Byrd. Michael, we just had a great time visiting with our good friend, Tim Sawyer. We learned a lot about his incredible journey. We actually, he gave us some incredible good takeaways, I think, for the entire audience. But I'd love to hear your thoughts about some of the things that he said that our audience should be considering.
We always talk at the beginning with our startups. So this is a lot of entrepreneurs or physicians starting their practice, and we ask what their goals are. Where are they going to be in 5 years? And that connects so much to Tim having the end in mind at the beginning. And from a legal perspective, it affects a lot. It affects your structure. And so if your goal, for example, like crystal clear, is to build it up and have an exit at some point, you may choose a different legal structure than if it's going to be a cash flow business that's going to take care of you and be your job for the foreseeable future. One of the things we'll see a lot of times in the tech world is the idea of, should we be a C corporation or an S corporation? And the C corporation for years was...
And pause just for the audience to understand. Michael's actually talking about determination of your tax election when you are determining between S and C.
Yes. So, yeah, you file an entity. You may be a corporation in whatever state, and then you make that election of whether you're going to be taxed as a C corporation. We could probably put everyone to sleep going into the depths of what that means. But the point is it's quite significant on the strategy you choose. So if you are in a cash flow business and a C corp, you are going to pay way more taxes. You hear the term double taxation for years. Yet if your idea is that you're going to build it up and sell it in 5, 7, 8 years, a C corp may be way better, and you may save tons of money because of the deductions that are available.
Yeah, and I think, if there's some other thoughts I had is, especially since you were talking about C and S corps, and we've dealt with this issue before, is people don't realize why it's so important. And the why is, if you're an S corporation, and this is the part where get ready to get your eyes rolling back and hopefully you'll stay awake, but the really important piece here is, if you're an S corp and you plan to have another business come in and buy into your entity, S corps are limited to natural people, meaning that another corporation can't come in and buy into your entity. And so in the transactions that we've been a part of, we had to conduct an S inversion. That means that they had to basically form a whole bunch of new entities, file new S elections, file a Q sub, revoke the Q sub. I mean, when I say, I know, imagine how you're feeling right now just hearing me talk about this, but that's going to slow you down your transaction completely and be very costly. Things that you didn't even think about, but the only way to get the deal closed is to do something like that.
And we talk about, many of you have heard us talk about the 550 rule over the years. And the basic idea is you can pay $5 to do it correctly on the front end, or pay $50 on the back end to clean it up. And this is another example where you can set up your structure, just kind of checking the box. I'm just going to go, form an LLC because that's what my friend did. Not think about where you're trying to go, and it may work out, or it may not be the right thing for where you're trying to go, and you end up spending the $50. Of course, we know that that's just an imaginary number. It's way more than $50.
This is true, and we have a story on that one too. What I want to wrap up now, Michael, but I think the important takeaways for everyone to think about is when you are opening your doors or coming up with your ideas, you need to do a little bit more pre-planning as to why are you starting this entity? Why are you starting this company? And people forget that. They're just in such a rush to get through the front door and get the doors open. They don't stop and really build their plan, their business plan, to really think through that. So I think that's a love about Tim, is that he's done this multiple times and he always starts with that process.
Awesome.
Thanks again for joining us today. And remember, if you like this episode, please subscribe, make sure to give us a 5-star rating, and share with your friends.
You can also sign up for the ByrdAdatto newsletter by going to our website at ByrdAdatto.com.
ByrdAdatto is providing this podcast as a public service. This podcast is for educational purposes only. This podcast does not constitute legal advice, nor does it establish an attorney-client relationship. Reference to any specific product or entity does not constitute an endorsement or recommendation by ByrdAdatto. The views expressed by guests are their own, and their appearance on the program does not imply an endorsement of them or any entity they represent. Please consult with an attorney on your legal issues.